breaking news today.
Please subscribe and then check notification box to get all breaking news alerts.
He's been freed. We are now receiving reports that the former British ambassador Craig Murray has confirmed that since Ecuador has granted Julian Assange citizenship, he should soon be free to legally leave the UK without any fear of prosecution or detention whatsoever. Along with his newly granted citizenship, there is nothing stopping the Ecuadorian government from officially appointing Assange a diplomat, which would, in turn, make him untouchable by any government authority other than that of Ecuador. Which means he can continue to move about the world and continue to help us peons by exposing the fraud and corruption being played out by those who govern us. The only way the UK could still ignore his new status is if after Ecuador notifies the British government that Assange is now a member of its diplomatic staff, the UK could still refuse it only by officially declaring Assange persona non grata. Which would mean he would lose his diplomatic immunity, which started the moment Assange was notified. It would actually continue until he has been given the chance to leave the country in a reasonable amount of time. So no matter what, Assange will go free. The Foreign Policy Journal reports. The persecution of Julian Assange. Julian Assange has been persecuted by Washington for 7 years now for exposing U.S. war crimes through his WikiLeaks organization. We need a political intervention to make this situation end. He, Assange, is the only political prisoner in Western Europe. Juan Bracco. The persecution of Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, is now 7 years old. Ecuador has protected Assange for the past half-decade from being turned over to Washington by the corrupt Swedish and British for torture and prosecution as a spy by giving Assange political asylum inside the Ecuadorian embassy in London. Ecuador has now given citizenship to Assange and attempted to provide his safe transit out of England by giving him diplomatic status, but the British government continued in its assigned role of jailer by rejecting Ecuador's request for diplomatic status for Assange, just as the most servile of Washington's puppet states rejected the order by the UN Committee on Arbitrary Detention to immediate release Assange from his arbitrary detention. Assange got into trouble with Washington because his news organization, WikiLeaks, published files released by Bradley Manning. The files were a tremendous embarrassment to Washington because they showed how Washington conspires against governments and betrays its allies, and the files contained an video film of U.S. military forces murdering innocent people walking down a street and then murdering a father and his 2 young children who stopped to give aid to the civilians the American soldiers had shot. The film revealed the heartlessness and criminal cruelty of the U.S. troops, who were enjoying playing a real live video game with real people as their victims. It was Manning who suffered, not the troops who committed murder. Manning was held for 2 years in conditions that experts said constituted torture while a case was framed against him. Some believe the harsh conditions affected his mind. Manning was convicted by a kangaroo court and sentenced to 35 years in prison. But Obama, in an act of humanity unusual for Washington, pardoned Manning. Washington wanted Assange as well, and the chance came when 2 Swedish women who, attracted to Assange by his celebrity status, seduced him. The 2 women had not secured the cooperation they wanted from Assange in the use of condoms and, brainwashed by HIV fears, wanted Assange to join them in being tested. Assange, misreading the extent of their fears, was too slow to comply, and the women went to the police to see if he could be required to be tested. According to the women, the police made up the charge of rape. The women themselves disavowed the charge. The charges were investigated, and the chief Swedish prosecutor Eva Finn dismissed the charges, saying there is no suspicion of any crime whatsoever. Mysteriously, the case was reopened by another prosecutor, Marianne N.Y., whom any suspect was operating at the behest of Washington. On November 30, 2 days after Assange began publishing the Cablegate materials leaked by Bradley Manning, NY issued an Interpol Red Alert arrest warrant for Assange. This was an unusual request as no charges were outstanding against Assange, and hitherto extradition from one country to another on an arrest